Hey everyone. So I've been looking for work in Virginia for the last 6 months and it's just not been showing up. So I'm moving back to Texas for a year. I've got a contract back at the university that I was working at to support someone who is going away on leave. And so I will be taking over their students and then also teaching classes on a new degree program that has just been initiated there, as well as teaching in the master's program that I was teaching at before. So because I'm moving back to Texas, I thought it would be a good time to do this two-part series on Texas, starting with the cryptids and the creatures of Texas that are unusual and beyond norm. So what I'd like to start with typically is how big Texas is, and the reason why there could be all these things that are living in this space. So let's start first with the general size of Texas. It is 268,597 square miles, which is second only to Alaska in landmass. So we're larger than California and Alaska. In Texas or in the United States, Alaska is only larger than Texas. To give you an example, Texas is larger than France. It has the fastest speed limit in the United States. Houston is actually an hour away from Houston. So if you go from one side of Houston to the other side, it's an hour. Dalhart, Texas, which is up in the panhandle area of Texas, Dalhart is closer to 6 other state capitals than it is to its own state capital. And Texarkana, which is in the northeast corner of Texas, is closer to the Atlantic Ocean than it is to El Paso, which is in the western portion of Texas. And El Paso is closer to the Pacific Ocean than it is to Texarkana. And just one other thing here, there's a ranch in Texas called the King Ranch. That ranch is larger than the state of Rhode Island. We also have a massive amount of ecological diversity. So we have at least 8 different biomes within the state of Texas. We have the piney woods, which is a temperate forest. It's in eastern Texas. We have Gulf prairies and marshes, which is along the coast, and it's coastal plains. We have post oak savanna and blackland prairies, which is in central Texas, and it's grasslands and savannas. We have cross timbers, which is oak and hickory woodlands. We have rolling plains and high plains, which is western grasslands and prairies. We have this thing called the Edwards Plateau, which is a unique limestone region. South Texas Plains, which is brushlands and subtropical. And then we have the Trans-Pecos, which is far west Texas, which is mountains and the Chihuahuan Desert. So, pardon me, we have this massive land. And in the Piney Woods region, the piney forest has more trees than the entire state of Oregon. So I just wanted to start there. I wanted to give you the context for what we're talking about. Now, the most popular and the most well-known of all of our cryptids is the one that's most well-known for almost everybody, and that's Bigfoot. And Bigfoot sightings have been happening, throughout history. So we can go back, probably in the 1800s. But we have some very famous ones. One of those is the legend of Boggy Creek. Now, this is sort of in the Texas-Arkansas area, so Texarkana. And we have a lake there called Caddo Lake. And we also have a creek called Boggy Creek. And there was a film called The Legend of Boggy Creek, which talked about the events that took place, and it was a docudrama, and they actually had people who had those encounters in the movie talking about their experiences. There have been sightings as recently as November 25th in Smith County. It was a daylight sighting of a Sasquatch outside of Garden Valley, which is approximately 20 miles northwest of Tyler, and Tyler is in the middle of the sort of Piney Woods area. So if you go to the BFRO database, they have been recording since the early 70s, but again, historically there's been sightings throughout history. And so the highest frequencies happen in East Texas in the Piney Woods area, and then we also have Northeast Texas, which is Cass, Marion, and Harrison counties, and then North Texas, where I lived, in the Denton and Clay counties, and then Southeast Texas, including Liberty, Hardin, and Tyler counties, and then the West and Panhandle area. So vast land where they are being seen in various locations. So pre-1900s, native and frontier tales talked about Bigfoot, and then in the 70s and 80s, East and Southeast Texas sightings surged. And then between the 2000s and 2010s, it spread across North and Central Texas. And there's, like I said, there's recent 2025, 2024 sightings on the BFRO website. Now, if you're interested in Texas Bigfoot, there's some books that you should look at. Lyle Blackburn has written a book called The Beast of Boggy Creek, as well as Beyond Boggy Creek, Texas Bigfoot, and the Boggy Creek Casebook. And Ken Gerhard wrote The Monsters of Texas and The Essential Guide to Bigfoot. But there's a guy named Craig Woolheater who runs the Texas Bigfoot Research Center, and he hosts events yearly in Jefferson and Fouke. They're Bigfoot events that he hosts in Jefferson, Texas, which is the Bigfoot capital of Texas. So if you're interested in that, go to one of his events, and you'll get to meet really cool people. I've met Ken, I've met Lyle, I've met Craig, obviously, but I've also met Ron Moorhead, and I've met, there's a few names there. I'm trying to remember them off the top of my head, but some really big names within the Bigfoot community. Now, Dogman is another creature, I would say like one step down. It's becoming more popular as we progress. Bigfoot used to be the main focus, and now Dogman is starting to take up a big portion of people's interest. And Texas has a history of Dogman sightings, and they're described as large bipedal wolf-like creatures, with recent reports in the Rio Grande Valley in San Benito. And the general folklore is centered around areas like a Texas Dogman triangle near San Antonio, Houston, and Dallas. So that's a very large triangle. And my house in Paradise, Texas actually sat inside that triangle, and we had some crazy stuff happen, which I talked about in the Dogman episode that I've done. But they're often involved in sightings of large, unidentified canids with glowing eyes and strange sounds. And these reports often involve frightening encounters, sometimes with blurry video evidence, which I don't trust video anymore because of the advent of AI, so it's difficult to ascertain what is and is not AI anymore. Sometimes it's very evident, but sometimes it's less so. There's also been sightings in Austin, in a park in Austin, so that makes me feel like it's pushing into into urban areas, and people will start seeing more of it. There was a sighting in an area that's near Lake Worth. There's a guy named Tex Wesson who talks about his encounter with this creature in a broad daylight. He was in a hunting area near Lake Worth, which is relatively heavily populated, and loads of people go to Lake Worth. It's a location that's very close to several large cities, so it's difficult to imagine that a werewolf would be just wandering around out there during daylight, but there it was, he said. And I had that conversation with him at one of the Texas Bigfoot conferences. So he has a podcast called Texas Front Porch, TEX''S, and he talks about that, but also talks about other cryptids as well. But the descriptions are is that it's a large, muscular, dog-like creature with large head and jaws, and it has the ability to stand and walk upright on two legs, and it's often described as 6 to 7 feet tall with glowing eyes. And it's super fast and powerful, and it seems to feed off of people's fears, like it loves to scare people. Now there's documentaries like Small Town Monsters, The Dogman Triangle, Werewolves in the Lone Star State, and it explores these legends, and it also talks about the sightings and talks to the people that have had those sightings. There's also Linda Godfrey. She's written several books about Dogmen in general, so she is like the godmother of Dogman. She wrote the books about Beast of Bray Road and the Michigan Dogman, and so if you want to just learn about that Dogman creature or entity, that she would be the first place to start. And then there's a book by Aaron Deese called The Dogman Triangle. If we step away from Dogman and we go to these hybrid-like creatures, there's a sheep squatch and a goat man. So sheep squatch are more like shaggy, large, Bigfoot-like creatures, but with horns. And then we have the goat man, which looks like a pan, or Mr. Timmons from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe from the movie. So the first one is the Lake Worth monster. Now, at first, when I was young, I thought the Lake Worth monster was a white Bigfoot, and that's not the case. What it is a white sheep squatch-like creature. And what they were saying is that it was massive, like it was really shaggy and large and muscular, and it had these curled horns. And it used to be seen around Greer Island, which is mostly submerged now, so you don't really see Greer Island anymore. And the primary time that it started becoming really large and really popular was in the 60s. But there's no modern sightings, unfortunately. But this thing was 6 to 7 feet tall, upright, body covered in white hair or fur, and it had a goat or sheep-like facial features in some accounts. And it had glowing red or yellow eyes and long arms ending in clawed hands, which is an odd combination of things. So the descriptions vary slightly, but it's like an ape-like horned animal. It was seen nocturnally. It approached vehicles. It scratched and damaged cars. It threw a tire at a couple's car 500 feet. The police came out. There was multiple independent witnesses. The law enforcement responded, and the newspapers treated it as a public safety issue because when they interviewed these people, they were terrified. So the names of this creature are the Lake Worth monster, Goat Man of Lake Worth, and then Sheep Squatch by cryptid writers when they talk about the features. But it's one of the best documented encounters that have taken place in a populated area. There's also this, I think it's more like a liminal creature. It's not really, or maybe a spiritual being, and it's the Goat Man of Old Alton Bridge in Denton County, Texas. Now, when I lived in Paradise, Texas, I was within 30 minutes of this Alton Bridge, Old Alton Bridge, and I lived about 30 minutes away from the Aurora UFO crash site, and I lived 30 minutes away from Lake Worth, where that sheep squatch was seen. So Paradise, Texas, right next to Springtown, Texas, has some high strangeness there. And so I'm going back to that area, not necessarily directly in Springtown, but I will be close to it. I'll be about maybe an hour away. And I plan on going back and seeing if I can go to some of these locations again. But the reports start in the early 20th century, and they continue to this day. And what people are seeing is a tall humanoid silhouette with a goat-like head or horns and goat-like legs. And they said it's a dark, shadow-like body with glowing red eyes. And sometimes it either appears partially formed or obscured, like maybe it's a ghostly thing as opposed to a physical form. And it appears on or beneath this old Alton Bridge, and it's territorial. It wants to scare people away. It wants to keep people off the bridge. And there's things that happen like throwing rocks or audible growls or knocks or footsteps, and it responds to people's presence. Rather than hunting people, it actually just tries to ward them away from that bridge. It stays very close to the bridge, and it doesn't pursue people when they go beyond it. And it seems to be tied to this structure. And so it's the Goat Man or the Old Alton Bridge Goat Man. Now we move from sort of land-based creatures to aquatic-based creatures. And we have several. So one is the Trinity River creature, and it's living in the Trinity River, which is a river that connects Dallas and Fort Worth and then downstream to Lake Livingston. And people have been seeing this from the 1800s to the present, but most reports happen in the mid-20th century. And what people are seeing are this massive submerged body that has a dark coloration with smooth or leathery skin, elongated or serpentine profile, with an occasional neck-like raise above the water, like you would see with the Loch Ness Monster, with no visible fins at all. And it moves against the current, it rocks boats, and it creates a disproportionate wake to the size, they think. And it's often people think it might be a catfish or a gar, but the size and shape are outside the bounds of that. However, I will say this, alligator gar can get quite large, so it could still be an alligator gar, and people are just misunderstanding the size due to distortion of the water or something like that. Now we also have the Caddo Lake monster, which is very similar. So people started seeing it in the late 1800s to early 1900s, and there's still some sporadic sightings, but not as often. And again, the Caddo Lake area is near the Boggy Creek, so there's another area of high strangeness around that swamp, the lake, and the creek, where the Bigfoot sightings were. So Caddo Lake is pretty large, and this thing appears to be large and bulky, dark with an indistinct outline, and it's sometimes described as serpentine, and it's usually seen below the waterline. It doesn't typically raise above it. Now, the problem is that the Caddo Lake is also a cedar swamp, and the cedar swamps are typically rusty colored water, so it's very difficult to see. And this thing's only seen, typically at night or dusk, so it makes it even more difficult to see it in the water. And again, what I think this could be is misrepresented or misidentified alligator gar, or a paddlefish, or even a large catfish. I know that we have catfish in Texas over 6 feet long in certain areas. So there have been reports of 6 foot plus catfish, which could appear serpentine-like, could have the dark mottled skin that they're talking about and the ridges. There's also paddlefish, which can get up to 7 feet long and weigh around 200 pounds. The alligator gar can get up to 10 feet long sometimes and 350 pounds, so they're terrifying creatures. There's also the thing called the Sabine River thing, and those reports were around the mid-20th century, so and it's only been like oral accounts of it, but basically same description: large, dark shape in the shallow water, no clear head or tail described, and moves deliberately, not like a fish, whatever that means. So what I think that means is that it feels less like a serpentine fish, moving its tail back and forth to move forward, and more like just almost torpedo-like. So we also have the Brazos River creature, which happened from the 1900s to present. There's still scattered reports of this thing. And same thing, long dark body beneath the surface, creates a heavy wake, sometimes described as serpentine or snake-like, and it occasionally surfaces briefly. And it's often reported by fishermen, and they're saying that it's too large for known species, and it's rarely been photographed. So all of these things could just be a paddlefish, like I said, which can get over 7 feet long and weigh nearly 200 pounds, or an alligator gar, which I'll talk about here in a minute. There's also the Galveston Island sea creature, and this happens near, obviously, Galveston Island, but it's in the Gulf of America or Mexico, whatever you want to go with. And the time frame is the late 1800s to early 1900s. And the appearance is serpentine or eel-like body with a large size, seen surfacing close to the shore with dark coloration. Now, what I think this might be is a ribbon fish. The dark coloration kind of throws me off because the ribbon fish are typically like a silvery color, but they get to very long lengths and they look super odd. They look like a giant sea serpent. But that's what I think that might be. And then we have the Matagorda Bay sea serpent reports, and the time frame on these is like the 19th and 20th century. So it has a long snake-like body, undulating movement, seen breaking the surface. And again, I think this might just be a ribbon fish. Now, I talked about the alligator jar. There are exceedance cases, and what I mean by that is that this animal is of cryptid level size reports. So alligator jar are seen in the Trinity River, Brazos River, Caddo Lake, and East Texas waterways. But what they're saying is that this length of the creature exceeds known records, and they have massive girth. And what they're saying is that the head is described as prehistoric, which an alligator jar looks prehistoric anyway. And they can be over 8 feet long and exceed 300 pounds, with maximum lengths potentially reaching 10 feet and weighing 350 pounds. And what they're saying is that they're larger than 10 feet. So that's where it pushes into cryptid territory. It could be a different species of alligator jar, I'm not sure. And then we also have the Rio Grande devils. Now this is large dark forms. I'm starting to see a pattern here with the underwater things. Large dark forms beneath the water, occasionally described as horned or ridged, and they surface rarely. And again, this is the time frame of 18 to 1900s. And this was the early settlers' terminology. They called them river devils. And if you look at old maps or look at places around the United States, there's lots of like devils and apes, and Devil's Canyon, Apes Canyon, Devil's Outcropping. There's lots of these interesting names, and that has to be taken from something. There's some sort of local folklore that attributes these names to that location. There's a Alameda Creek thing, which is kind of like a large moving mass in shallow water, which is poorly defined, and it disturbs the water rather than giving clear visuals. So that's probably the least described, and people often conflate this for some reason with the Marfa-lights, meaning that this blobby thing that's moving around. With the Marfa-lights, and I'll get into that in the next episode, but in the Marfa-lights, it's just a light that's seen moving around independent of anyone or anything, just like an orb. And so I'm thinking that this may be just some sort of large blob shape that's just moving around and people are seeing. Now, moving away from the water here and the very explicit and detailed observations from those, there's another type of creature called a Uvalde goblin, and it's small, hairy, it's like territorial and angry. But there's this, in native culture, there are accounts all over the United States of little people. And some of them are called pukwudgies or duendes. But in Texas, we have a lot of different indigenous people. And so they have different concepts of this same creature. But they're all talking about the same thing. They're just using their own language. So we have the Caddo Confederacy, which is in the Piney Woods, the Big Thicket, Sabine River, and Red River valleys. And they have oral traditions from pre-colonial times to the 1800s. And what they see is small human-like figures near the forest edges, near mound sites, and along rivers at dusk. And they're sometimes heard laughing, whistling, or rustling, and they typically, as their behavior, lead people off of paths. So kind of like a trickster spirit, hiding tools or food, and then appearing after disrespecting the land and then vanishing suddenly. We also have the Alabama Coshada tribe of Texas, and they're in Polk County, Trinity River Valley, and Big Thicket, and they have the same stories. The entity name that they use is Yahola, which basically is talking about the 2 to 3 foot tall human-shaped thing which has an earth-colored skin, seen peeking from trees or brush, and sometimes invisible except for movement, so like a cloaked figure. And again, playful trickery, protection of the forest areas, and would retaliate if mocked or followed. Then we have the Lipan Apache tribe, and small beings in rocky terrain seen near caves, hills, or arroyos, and they're rarely described in detail, and the reason for that was by the Apaches is that it's taboo to discuss these things. And so they avoid them, but they do say when they're seen, they appear briefly, then vanish, and they're sometimes blamed for missing items or misdirection. And then we have the Comanche Nation, and they're in the Texas Panhandle area, but also the Rolling Plains and the Red River. And they have encounters from pre-colonial times to the late 1800s. And their descriptions are the same: small wild people, human-like but not human. And they're rarely seen directly. They're often detected by movement or sound, like at the corner of your vision. And the reported behavior there is trickster behavior, disorienting travelers, and they're considered dangerous to pursue. And then we have the Tonkawa tribe, and they're Central Texas, Brazos River, and Colorado River. And their encounters are from the pre-colonial times to the early 1800s. And these are small forest or river edge peoples, and they're rare sightings and often blamed for strange sounds at night. They're to be avoided, never approached, and mentioned only as warnings. And then we have the Karankawa tribe, and they're Texas Gulf Coast and Matagorda Bay. And their encounter period is from the pre-1700s to early colonial accounts. And again, small inland beings, rarely coastal. They're seen near marshes or wooded areas, and they're to be avoided, blamed for disappearances, and poorly described due to loss of language. And then the border folk lore in the non-tribal Texas sort of Spanish speaking environment is called a duende. And this is in the Rio Grande Valley, Laredo, and Brownsville. And this is the Spanish colonial era to present. People are still seeing them. And they're 1 to 3 feet tall, childlike, with old man faces. Sometimes they're wearing hats or clothes, and they're seen inside or near homes. And the behavior that's reported is stealing objects, moving household items, and appearing repeatedly to the same families. So, across every indigenous person's Texas tradition, they're small, they're territorial, they're dangerous only if they're disrespected, and you should avoid them as opposed to confronting them. And it's fascinating that there's these reports all over the United States from indigenous tribes as well. So these little people are something that they believe in wholeheartedly, and therefore I take very seriously. Then there's this other category called human hybrids, and one of those is really interesting. It's called the donkey lady. Now, this is a human-donkey hybrid, and there's some legends around it. So there's 2 different legends around this. One is that a farmer sets fire to his home, killing his family, and the wife survives, but is left with severe burns on her face, which melted into a snout, and her hands fused like hooves, which is where the donkey lady name comes from. Another version of this story is that she claims that there is a woman and her donkey were drowned by the townspeople after the donkey bit a child. So whatever the reasoning for this lady comes back as a donkey in spirit. And so this is in San Antonio, and there's a bridge that's been renamed to Donkey Lady Bridge because of this. So the original accounts are from the 1800s to the early 1900s, and it was popularized in the 60s through the 80s. But basically, it's a human-sized female with donkey-like features or an elongated snout. She has hooves or malformed feet in some reports, and hairy or rough skin. But it could be like a burned skin, like a charred skin, if it was the fire. So the behavior is that it appears near a bridge or roadways at night, and it's aggressive or territorial if you get within that bridge area, and it chases vehicles or pedestrians in some accounts. So I look at this more as a haunting, but the car attacks, the visitors report that the donkey lady slams on their car, leaving hoof prints or deep scratches. People hear screams, heavy breathing, or distinct sounds of hooves on the bridge at night. And the appearance is a charred, melted figure with glowing eyes, resembling a woman with donkey-like features. That's what some people are seeing. And the bridge is located on Old Applewhite Road, south of San Antonio, and the bridge itself is said to hold the tragic memory, like the stone tape recording theory that most paranormal people talk about. And it's a popular spot for ghost tours and dares, especially at night, with many claiming to experience paranormal activity while they're on the bridge. Now there's another creature, and this is sort of famous for Mexican and South Texas folklore, about a witch who transforms into a giant owl with a woman's face. And she haunts the night, preying on disobedient, drunk, or careless people who cross her. And then she often appears as a huge owl with glowing eyes, or she uses mimicking baby cries to lure people in. So the name of this creature is called La Lechuza, and the locations of these takes place in South Texas, Laredo, and Brownsville. Now, the first oral traditions of this was pre-1900s, but it still continues to this day. And the appearance is this massive owl-like body, a wingspan exceeding known owls, and a human-like face or eyes reported in some encounter. And it has dark or mottled feathers. Once again, it mimics human voices, like calling or crying like a baby, and it appears near homes or ranches, and it's kind of like observational. It waits to see what you're going to do, if you're going to be good or bad, and then it attacks. Now there's another weird one called the Houston Batman, and it reminds me of Spring Hill Jack or some other bat or costumed anomalies that have taken place around the world. But the location for this is Houston in Harris County. And this started in the late 1800s, early 1900s, prior to aviation. But basically what people were seeing was a man-shaped humanoid silhouette with large bat-like wings, a wingspan of 6 to 8 feet, with dark coloration and no tail. The behavior was that it would glide or slowly flap over the rooftops or streets in a silent flight. And it wouldn't attack, it would just show up. So there are some very similar creatures in the world. So like the Ahul in Indonesia is a giant bat-like figure. There's the bat squatch in the Pacific Northwest. There's Mothman. There's the orang bati in Indonesia, which is a bat-like creature. And the Camazotz in Mesoamerica, the ancient Mayan death bat deity or creature associated with sacrifice in the underworld. So there's a history of these bat-like creatures seen around the world. There's also flying creatures. There's a giant big bird of Rio Grande Valley, and that's seen in the 1970s specifically. But it's an enormous bird with an estimated wingspan of 15 to 20 feet with dark feathers, a long neck, and powerful legs or talons. There's also one, which is the Thunderbird type report, and this is in South and West Texas in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And again, it's a massive bird with outstretched wings, dark coloration, and sometimes described with exaggerated size. And I had a friend who was driving one night, dark road, and he said it looked like a pterodon or a pterosaur flew over the top of his car, and it freaked him out and he almost crashed. Now there's some other creatures I'm going to go through really quickly because they're kind of one-offs. There's the Wampus cat, which is seen in East Texas, the Piney Woods, Hardin County, Polk County, and the Sabine River. And the first references started in the 1800s, and there's still some reports to this day, but the reports started declining in the 1950s. Now what I think this might be, they're saying it's larger than a cougar. It has a low, long, muscular body with dark fur and thick or unusually long tail with a broad head with cat-like features. My thought here is that it could be a melanistic jaguar because they had a range up into Texas, and people are saying that they no longer have that range, but there's possibilities of that outlier still being in those areas in the 1950s. So here's the weird ones that I'm going to end the episode with. There's the Bear King of Marble Falls, which looked like a large upright humanoid with a bear-like head or facial structure, covered in dark fur, extremely broad shoulders, and 7 to 8 feet tall. But there was a very short window of sightings, so I think somebody just saw something crazy or something that appeared to them maybe bear-like, but it could be a sheep squatch type creature. And then there's the Van Horn thing, which is the least described cryptid I've ever seen in my life. Larger than a coyote, but smaller than a horse. Long-limbed, thin-bodied, quadrupedal, but could be bipedal. Extremely fast. The head was shaped wrong or incorrect or weird, so it doesn't have any real features to talk about. So that was the thing that made it most difficult to have a conversation about. All right, there you go. Texas Cryptids. This is part 1 of a 2-part series. I hope you're enjoying this new format. If you are enjoying it, please like, subscribe, follow, rate, review, whatever you want to do. Tell friends. Let's get involved in the conversation. Send me an email, mike@arcane-station.com. Go to arcane-station.com. You can see all the episodes there. I have a shop on that site as well. I may be taking it down while I'm in Texas because it's difficult for me to be in 2 places at once. And so I look forward to hearing from you. You have a wonderful night.